Have you ever sat in that heavy silence at a family dinner? Here on Women's Life Stories, we retell those moments, honest, everyday, sometimes controversial. Every story is a mirror. Subscribe, join the conversation, and maybe find a little healing. My name is Helen Ward. I turned 62 last winter, the kind of birthday you mark with a lemon cake and a phone that buzzes for everyone else's emergencies. For most of my life, people spoke about me by relation, someone's wife, someone's mother, the woman who kept the light on and the rent paid. If there was a cue for credit when a thing was finally done, I was already in the kitchen washing the last pan. I once worked 3 rotating shifts laundry at a clinic before dawn, a cashier's apron in the afternoon office, cleaning long after the buses emptied. The night routes became my geography. I could tell time by which storefronts still glowed and which windows flickered to black. My husband Andrew died 10 years ago, and the quiet that followed wasn't peace so much as space where instructions used to be. I learned the kind of arithmetic you do with your back turned, adding late fees, subtracting pride, multiplying coupons until a week made sense. My daughter Lila grew up inside that hush. When she was little, she tucked crayon notes into my jacket pocket. "You're my star mom." Each one bent at the corners from living in the heat of my wrist. I kept them for years in a tin that once held tea biscuits. You could open the lid and smell paper and sugar and everything I wanted to be good. Somewhere between sneakers and stilettos, Lila's voice learned a new edge. Advice made her roll her eyes. Questions she called interruptions. If I stood in a room too long, I became the coat rack. The first time she called me staff, it was Thanksgiving, the year I overdid the cloves and the pumpkin pie. Family drifted from the front door to the kitchen in a fog of wool and perfume. I had brined the turkey in a stock pot that did not, strictly speaking, fit in the sink. When Lila came in late and luminous in a coat that fell like water, she laughed toward the table and said, "Look at our staff going full Martha Stewart." There were chuckles, not unkind, but no one looked to see if I was a person inside the joke. I kept carving. You can cut through a breastbone without raising your voice. After that, staff was a hat she tossed on me whenever a crowd required a laugh. Christmas, she lifted her empty flute and called across the room, "Refill, please." This family comes with full service. The words were shiny and light. The room accepted them like canapes. Later, I stood at the sink with the good towels and asked the spice rack when I had become a uniform. The morning it all tilted was plain as bread. A cloudy Tuesday kettle whistling, one sock still damp on the radiator. My phone lit up with Lila's name in 3 hearts. She didn't ask how I was, so she said, breathless with planning, "We've secured the Aurelia Grand for my engagement gala. 40 people. It's 5-star mom ceilings like spun sugar chandeliers like galaxies. I need you to put it on your card." There are numbers you can hear without listening. $60,000 is one. My thumb left a crescent in the wood of the table. I tried to find a sentence that began with "I" and didn't end with "sorry." "Lila," I said, "measuring air 60,000 is..." "Don't start." She laughed gently, the way you soothe a fussy child. "It's not a big deal for you. You always come through. I'll handle the image, the press, the vibe. You just handle the money. That's your role, Mom. My role." She placed the word where my name should be. After we hung up, I watched the kettle spit and settle. Steam curled against the window and wrote a brief white line that said, "Wait." I found my coupon binder, the one with plastic sleeves and tabs for every store, though I hardly needed it anymore. I flipped it open to check an old habit still fit my hand. Then I put on my coat, because a person can sit very still and feel herself vanish, or she can stand up and move. At the bank, the floor smelled like disinfectant and someone else's winter coat. The forms were as pale as hospital light. The woman at the counter complimented my penmanship. I signed the transfer with the same grip I used for scrubbing tile grout, elbow steady, jaw quiet. The money was there. That wasn't the question. The question had to do with the shape of my name when someone else needed a stage. On the way home, the bus was warm enough to drowse. I stayed awake counting the red roofs between my stop and the church lot, like when Lila was small and I kept her from sleeping too close to supper. I detoured to Wren and Hale, the stationery store where the owner keeps a bowl of lemon candies by the register. I bought a linen-covered notebook with pages that open flat and take ink without bleeding. No title on the front, no lines dictating how tall your letters should be. I wanted paper that would not flinch. At the house, the late sun made a stain on the hallway runner that looked like a small field. I set the receipt and the new notebook on my desk, then opened the top drawer. Nestled inside a folded dish towel, white once now with a faint T mark, was a small brass key strung on a narrow, worn ribbon. It was not to a vault or a safe. The key's usefulness was old news. Years ago, Miriam Cho, a friend who practices law and never forgets a birthday, pressed it into my palm after I finished signing a stack of documents. "An anchor," she said. "For the days your worth feels misplaced. The key fit my hand the way a stone from a familiar beach does, cool first, then yours. I held the key, then set it on the notebook, where its weight made a soft ellipse in the cloth. Lila texted a photo of the ballroom she wanted. High arches, gold leaf on the cornices, a staircase designed for entrances. This, she wrote. Non-negotiable. I typed "I saw" and left it at that. I don't bargain with a phone. That evening I cooked a roast because muscle memory feeds a house when you don't know what else to do. Roasting and pan-rack onions, cut careless bay leaf you can never find when you need it. I ate at the counter. The chair across from me stayed empty and well-behaved. Lila sent another message, florist, totals of photographer's package, a link to a dress that looked like frost. Then, unprompted, we're keeping it intimate. 40 is basically family. I set the phone face down and listened to the oven calm as it cooled. People imagine strength looks like a speech. Mine has always worn quieter clothes. I rinsed the pan, laid the good towel beside the sink to dry, and took the notebook and the key to the table. On the first page, I wrote the date and nothing else. When my hand hovered for a second as if asking permission, I let the second pass. There are moments you don't talk through. You stand inside them until they take your shape. I thought of Lila as a little girl at Mercy Market. Her hand wrapped around 2 of my fingers, because 3 made her feel too small. We couldn't always afford the cereal with the cartoon on the box, but we had enough, and enough has a shine you only see when it's threatened. She used to fall asleep in the bus seat with her head against my shoulder, and I could feel her breathing claim and release the day. The first time I heard her call me staff, I remembered that breath and wondered how a river unlearns its source. The lamp on my desk hums if you listen. I listened. The key warmed faintly the way metal will under a living hand. Across the street, somebody's television laughed for them. I opened the window an inch and let February's dark come in to say it would be there when I wanted it, and I closed it again. Lila called late. City noise braided into her voice horns, a door shoes finding a pace. Just confirming, she said, brisk with relief, deposits gone through. The coordinator will email you the balance. The Aurelia Grand is the most photographed space in the city, Mom. This is exactly the kind of moment that sets a tone. You'll be proud. Eat something, I said, because that is the last thread you never cut. She laughed, said she'd already had a smoothie, promised she'd sleep, and hung up with a kiss toward the receiver that landed somewhere near the lamp's hum. I placed the key back in the drawer, not hidden, resting. I folded the dish towel over it so the brass wouldn't scuff the wood. The notebook I left open to the first page, where the date waited like a small patient witness. On a sticky note, I wrote 3 grocery items and 1 phrase, not for Lila, not for a crowd, only for the woman who had work in the morning. Respect is not up for debate. Then I turned off the light. You don't have to announce every boundary you keep. By Thursday, the roast pan was dry on the rack and the brass key slept in the drawer beneath a folded dish towel. I wore a dark sweater and the pearls Andrew had given me the year Lila lost her first tooth, because rituals steady the wrist when words will not. I set the table with plain white plates and the thin linen napkins my mother hemmed by hand, the thread a little uneven near the corner where she must have been tired. The kettle clicked off. Steam lifted like a quiet curtain. Lila arrived first, perfume arriving half a step ahead of her phone held in front of her face, as if light might leak without it. She kissed the air near my cheek. You look nice, she said, which meant I matched the furniture. Behind her, Evan Vale stepped in with a politician's handshake and a jaw that had met a tailor. The watch at his wrist found the lamp before his eyes did. Smells wonderful, Ms. Ward, he said, scanning the room rather than the food. Home cooking is a lost art. You'll need a plate then, I said, and handed him one. He took it like a document for signature. We ate because that is what a table asks of you. Lila ran through arrangements the way other people read weather reports. Florist deposits a photographer who understands light, a seating plan that respects optics. When she said Aurelia Grand, I set down my fork to keep the china from catching the tremor. Words like intimate and 40 guests and tasteful lay in the air soft as any sales pitch. It's not like we're entertaining the entire city, she said. Just our circle. The press will appreciate restraint. Evan lifted his glass, the smile that comes with practiced warmth settling into place. Legacy is built on how you appear when people look, he said. We'll make sure they see Lila properly. The napkin in my lap carried a silvered edge from years of careful washing. My thumb followed the seam as if it could locate a path beneath cloth. Eat while it's hot, I said, because temperature is a language that doesn't argue. Conversation turned inheritance. Does that circling a room without calling itself by name? Evan leaned back, fingers laced behind his head the way men in commercials trust leather chairs. You shouldn't worry about costs, Ms. Ward, he said. These are investments in the family's image. And anyway, structures are easier when paperwork is clean. If you want, I can recommend a firm to simplify transitions. Spare Lila unnecessary stress. Evan? Lila tapped his wrist with her fork, playful and pointed. We're not lawyering at dinner. He grinned. I'm teasing, mostly. Their laughter settled like confetti pretty at a distance, paper underfoot in the morning. I poured gravy into the thin stream between meat and potatoes and tried to remember where I had put my appetite down. The lamp hummed its small hum. Lila captured the plate on her phone for a story she would caption home but make it chic, and then set the screen face down as a favor to me. When she reached the number again, 60 for the deposit, the balance is variable. She was a weatherman with a calm voice in a storm that did not touch her lawn. You already sent the first transfer, she said. So we're good. I just need you to confirm with the coordinator tomorrow morning. There's a window on the ballroom. It's the staircase everyone photographs. Evan nodded toward me. Your signature keeps things moving. You're very efficient. I've done some things more than once, I said. After dinner, the clink of plates became a rhythm that kept me from hearing my own pulse. Evan carried the wine glasses to the sink as if participating in charity. Lila paced the hallway, dictating notes into her phone. When they stood to leave, Evan shook my hand with both of his. We're lucky to have you, he said, a phrase that covers all debts with a blanket of gratitude. Lila touched my shoulder. You always come through, Mom, she said, and the words were gentle as a leash. When the door closed, the house exhaled properly. I gathered the napkins for the wash and pressed my fingers along the silvered seam again to quiet the part of me that wished seams would explain themselves. Morning brought a sky the color of unpolished spoons. I took the early bus downtown, the one that leaves before men in blue suits claim the aisle. The Aurelia Grand rises from the corner of Elder and Price, the way confidence rises chrome and stone glass that reflects only what flatters. In the lobby, chandeliers fell like poured light. A grand piano rested under a velvet rope as if it were sleeping on order. Good morning, said the woman at the reception podium. Her badge read Ella in friendly capitals. Welcome to the Aurelia. Helen Ward, I said. I'm here regarding the Vales' engagement gala. Lila had decided on Evan's last name for the invitation, its vowels pleasing on cardstock. I was told to meet the coordinator. Yes, of course. Ella's smile softened in the way of someone who recognizes a name without saying why. Ms. Ward, please this way. She led me down a corridor that smelled of citrus and carpet cleaner, past framed photographs of silent couples drifting under cascades of flowers. One image showed the ballroom staircase, a sweep of marble and brass designed for people who like to be observed walking down. As we turned a corner, a porter coming the other way glanced up, then inclined his head in the smallest bow. I've learned a bow takes up less room than a wave. The events office was a hive with low voices. A man in a navy suit stood when I entered. He had the posture of someone who had once stood behind a front desk and never forgot what it taught him. Ms. Ward, he said as if the syllables were a familiar coin. I'm Arjun Patel, Senior Coordinator. Thank you for coming. His handshake was warm as a fresh mug. Papers lay waiting on his desk, timelines, menus, diagrams of tables that formed circles, squares, or constellations depending on expectations. He reviewed the contract with the steady air of a pilot who has flown this landing in fog and in sun. I read the documents the way I read recipe cards, once for the feel, once for the numbers. You've already posted the deposit, he said. We'll only need your confirmation on menu tier, bar service, and security, then a signature for the room hold. We can accommodate 40 comfortably with a 4-piece ensemble. If you'd like, we'll adjust the lighting to something softer after introductions. That would be fine, I said. He slid forward a tray of silk-bound swatches, a rainbow for people who require their lives to match their wardrobes. I rested my hand on a particular ivory just to feel how fabric forgives pressure. Arjun watched not unkindly. You know the building, he said. I know how places work when they need to look effortless. He smiled. The most difficult trick we perform. When the forms were ready, he uncapped a pen and passed it to me. It sat in my fingers with the easy weight of tools I've used forever, sturdy like a wooden spoon balanced like a good pair of shears. I signed my name where the lines wanted it. Arjun squared the papers by their corners, a man who believes corners should behave. Thank you, Ms. Ward, he said, then paused. Would you like to view the room? It helps to see how sound lives in there. Ella reappeared as if she had been standing in the hallway waiting to be needed. We walked past a pair of double doors with brass panels that held fingerprints like secrets into a long gallery where portraits smoldered under low lamps. At the far end stood the ballroom doors, 12 feet of veneer and promise. A custodian with a keyring that chimed when he moved unlocked the left-hand door and eased it open. Inside, the chandeliers were dimmed to a pause, the floor unrolled like a lake without wind. Against one wall, a crew was setting risers. Against another, a florist in a black jumpsuit coaxed peonies from boxes as if waking birds. A man on a ladder adjusted a gobo so the light would whisper a pattern onto plaster without shouting its presence. Lila swept in before the echo of her heels had time to catch up. A stylist trailed her complexion products parceled on a rolling case like paints on a palette. Mom, she called already mid-brief. Arjun is a dream. We're locking the quartet. Evan wants the photographer to have a run-through of the staircase angles. Oh, about the menu, I think we should add oysters. The press loves an ice display. Oysters will need crushed ice stations, Arjun said, already drawing a small sketch. We'll arrange for discreet drainage. Perfect, Leela said, tapping her phone. Also, the napery should be warmer than bone, but not quite cream. Chic without reading winter. I stood near a column where someone had polished yesterday into the surface so completely it could not remember itself. Ella passed within arm's length and without looking at me straightened the corner of a drape just so. The gesture had the intimacy of tucking hair behind a child's ear. Evan arrived 10 minutes later with a stride like a presentation. He kissed Lila's cheek for the camera that wasn't there and shook Arjun's hand like introducing himself to an investor. Then he turned to me. We're keeping things smooth, he said. Your role is crucial. Just don't let logistics upstage the moment. I'll try not to let tables steal the scene, I said. He grinned as if I'd told a joke he had thought of first. Exactly. Lila turned sudden impatience, flashing a blade under silk. Mom, we'll need you to confirm the final figures. Don't worry about the technical stuff. I'll handle the image. Her gaze slid past me to the staircase, already filming the future in her head. Arjun cleared his throat gently. Ms. Ward, when you're ready, we can stop by the office to finalize. Ella, would you walk with us? We stepped back into the corridor, the ballroom sound folding itself behind the door as if trained. Ella matched my pace half a step behind the professional's choreography that says I am here if you need me, absent if you don't. We passed a service door, propped open by a crate of votive candles. Through it, I glimpsed a world I understood better, racks of linens, a trolley with polish and rags, a woman with a clipboard counting glassware as if counting beads on a string. Ms. Ward, Ella said softly enough for the hallway to keep. We're grateful you came in person. I sign better sitting down, I said. That too. She smiled, a small private thing that touched the edges of respect without naming its source. Back in Arjun's office, I initialed where tabs suggested. There is a calm particular to completion. It sits in the chest the way a stone sits in the palm. Solid, real answer to a hand that reaches. Arjun placed the folder in a drawer, closed it with care, and stood. We'll see you on the evening itself, he said. Your preferences are noted. Outside, the lobby had shifted its light from morning to noon. The piano remained under its rope. I stopped beside a framed photograph from the hotel's early years. Women in gloves at a luncheon, a banner in the background with a name that no one uses anymore. Buildings collect versions of themselves the way an attic collects boxes. You can stand very still in a grand place and see every broom that ever passed. On Elder Street, the wind worked its way under my collar. I walked 2 blocks to Wren and Hale to buy lemon candies from my pocket because sometimes sweetness is the smallest, bravest thing. The cashier, a man with kind wrists, slid the jar toward me and said, Back again, Ms. Ward, as if the day had been waiting politely for me to return. At home, I set the folder from Arjun beside the linen notebook and placed the jar of candies on top as ballast. Lila texted a stream of hearts and a photo of the staircase edited cooler. Evan added, We're in great hands. Try to rest. I put the phone face down and folded the silver-edged napkin so the seam ran clean. Toward dusk, I took the long way around the block, past the community garden where Fennel had gone leggy, and Brave past the hardware store that still sells keys, cut while you wait. I paused outside the window for a moment and watched a boy watch a machine grind a blank into a match, shavings curling like punctuation. When I got back, the hallway stain had moved with the sun. The house recognized me as if I had been gone a week. I opened the drawer and lifted the dish towel. The brass key lay where I had left it, a small honest weight. I set it on the linen notebook and smoothed the towel beside them, then wrote a list on a card, bread vinegar tulips, and under it a single line for my own attention, written as plainly as any grocery, keep the room for the truth. I boiled water for tea. The kettle took its time, which is another way of saying it did not hurry on my account. When it sighed, I poured sat and let the steam find my face. The lamp hummed. My name was my own weight in my mouth. I tasted the lemon from the candy on my tongue and the metal of the spoon cooling against the saucer. In the quiet, everything held. The Aurelia at night behaves like a stage after the orchestra has tuned bright enough to promise shadowed enough to keep breath measured. Cars slid up to the awning in a satin line. Lila stepped out of a black sedan with a silk train gathering light as if it were currency. A photographer she liked from a magazine leaned backward for angles, the shutter making a soft insect sound. Evan guided her by the elbow, the practiced tenderness that reads well in pictures. I followed at an ordinary pace, the kind a body keeps when it has learned the difference between hurry and haste. The lobby smelled of lilies and soap. Ella stood near the podium in a formal black dress that made her badge look almost ceremonial. She inclined her head. Good evening, Ms. Ward. Evening, I said. The brass key rested in my clutch, cool and exact. We reached the ballroom doors, 12 feet of dark gleam with handles burnished by decisions. A small crowd gathered, their voices a sugar glaze over nerves. Lila marked her arrival with a pause for cameras, her chin angled toward the chandelier as if it had endorsed her. She pressed both palms to the doors and pushed them wide. Silence met her like a held breath. No tables, no linens, no quartet warming a scale. The chandeliers hung dimmed as if the room were listening. The floor shone empty as a promise not yet made. For an instant, the air hummed with confusion's soft electricity. Then the guests began to shift one heel at a time, looks passing face to face like folded notes. Lila froze in the doorway, color skating from her mouth. "No," she said, a whisper breaking on marble. No, this is the wrong." She turned toward Arjun, who stood near the side entrance with his clipboard at attention. "You said the room was set." Arjun's voice remained the same temperature as always. "The room is as reserved, Ms. Vale." Evan's smile found a fissure. "There's clearly been a mistake," he told the room, speaking to no one in particular and everyone at once. "We had confirmations. This is ridiculous." I stepped over the threshold. My heels marked their sound, one and then the next. I did not speak. I opened my clutch, took out the brass key, and set it on the nearest side table. The metal made a clean, modest note against wood. A few heads turned as if to locate the source of a bell. Lila pointed at me, rage knocking against humiliation in her throat. "Mom, what did you do? Did you forget to pay? Did you cancel? Answer me." I folded the silver-edged napkin I had tucked in my clutch and placed it beside the key. The two small weights looked like a paired sentence. "Stand back from the doorway," I said. "You're letting the chill in." She stared, caught by the flatness of my tone. Behind us, someone coughed softly. Evan lowered his voice and used it like a knife. "Helen, this is unacceptable. People of consequence are here. You've embarrassed Lila." The side doors opened. Staff entered through the quieter path. Ella, 2 floor captains, 3 porters in dark uniforms. They stopped halfway into the room, hands folded neatly. Arjun stepped forward and bowed his head the width of a breath. "Good evening, Madam Ward," he said. "Shall we begin the set now?" The words settled across the room with the weight of a dropped curtain. A few guests shifted as if their shoes had discovered a seam in the floor. Lila's mouth parted and held her lipstick a color that could not decide whether to stay. Evan blinked. "I'm sorry, what did you call her?" Arjun did not adjust his voice. "Madam Ward," he repeated. "Owner." Eyes, so many eyes, rearranged themselves to look at me instead of Lila. Somewhere near the entrance, the photographer's shutter went mute. The chandeliers seemed to sharpen pinpoints of light, becoming points of attention. I looked at Ella. She nodded the nod of a person who has seen a truth arrive on schedule. Lila's throat worked around a word and wouldn't swallow it. "Owner," she said, as if trying a foreign sound. "Of what?" "Of this property," Arjun said steady, and others in the group. Evan laughed, once the kind of laugh that wants to make air go backward. "That's ridiculous. She clips coupons. She drives a 10-year-old sedan." I touched the key with my fingers and left it where it was. "Cars do what keys tell them," I said. Lila faced the room without quite letting her back touch it. Her gaze found mine, blue as the winter morning she was born. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I told you many things," I said. "You screened for what fit your story." Arjun lifted a hand. The crew moved, not hurried, not slow. Risers rolled in linens, smoothed over tables that unfolded like pulled breath. Ella directed with a glance. The quartet filed through the side door, lifted their instruments, and began to tune to a pitch that made the room remember itself. In the doorway, a pair of guests who had prepared to be amused prepared instead to stand correctly. Evan leaned toward me, smile trimmed back to its wire. "You set her up." "No," I said. "I set the tables." I walked to the center of the floor and felt the room correct around my body, the way a coat corrects around your shoulders. Lila stood where the light made a shallow stage. I considered how small she had been in the aisle of Mercy Market. Her hand warmed by mine, how she would count the cans of tomatoes like a game, to pretend choice where choice did not exist. That memory stepped up beside me and stayed. "Lila," I said. I didn't lift my voice. I placed each word where it would be found. "You have called me staff in front of a room. You have said my role was to pay and be quiet. You have wrapped my name in a bow and handed it to convenience." I let the last syllable rest. "Everything you have walked on tonight was paid for by the hours you did not see. Everything you have asked me to fund belongs to a woman you did not look at. This is the stage you wanted. Stand up on it properly." Her lips trembled, a small, unpracticed movement. She tried to hold herself to the angles a stylist had taught her. The angles refused. Evan's voice sharpened. "This isn't about you, Helen. Tonight is about Lila's ascent." I looked at him as if examining a new kind of beetle. "The night is about what a room will bear." Arjun gestured. The chandeliers lifted a measure of light. The ballroom began to fill, not with sound yet, but with arrangement. A table appeared near the doors. On it placed, cards glided into order. Lila startled as if the cards had spelled something out loud. A woman in a dark green dress, a client of Evan's. If I placed her correctly, stepped close to Lila and whispered something urgent, eyes sliding toward me and back. Two of Lila's friends hovered at a polite distance, mouths shaped like sympathy and eyes hungry and bright. The photographer lifted his camera again, slower now, as if the lens wanted to understand the floor. I stepped to the side table and set the key on my palm. Its weight felt like an answer the body knows before the mind arrives. Respect, I said to the room and not to it, is not up for debate. The quartet found their pitch. Music lifted, not triumphal, not mournful, something in between that lets a person cross a room without breaking. Staff moved with the choreography that comes from long practice and good lists. In less than a minute, the air that had been emptied of expectation filled with the plain usefulness of people who know how to make an evening take shape. I turned to Arjun. Begin as planned. Of course, he said, and then lower, thank you. Guests eased in some, with faces still smooth, others with expressions rearranged to account for an update. Ella directed arrivals as if shuffling a deck she already knew by heart. The first tray of sparkling water passed. A young server held it to the left of the guests, so the right hand remained free to accept or refuse. This is a small trick that makes people feel considered. I have always measured rooms by such tricks. Lila stepped toward me, small and quick, her voice a low wire. You let me walk into an empty room. You asked me to fund a room you assumed belonged to you. It wasn't a lesson I agreed to. You have not agreed to most of what has kept you standing. She flinched, then masked it, then couldn't quite keep the mask. Everyone saw, she said. They'll talk. They planned to talk anyway. Her chest rose and fell in the pattern of a person who has finally lost track of her own script. She turned to Evan, seeking pairing, then watched him measuring the angle of an arriving couple's attention as if it were a market to be conquered. I saw a very small switch flick in her eyes, not a revelation, nothing so dramatic, just a dimmer easing down. The program proceeded. Announcements came, names were pronounced, a toast attempted, and rescued by Arjun's gentle intercession when the microphone fussed. By the time appetizers traveled the room, the disaster had been folded into the narrative. Guests would tell themselves later that they had been present for something more interesting than planned. I did not hover. I stood where I could see the doors and the staircase and the places where drafts like to live. The key rested in my clutch again, the napkin a small anchor against metal. Twice strangers I recognized from Lila's photos approached with careful admiration. We had no idea one said, a smile placed precisely. I nodded the minimum that courtesy requires and stepped aside so Ella could pass with a tray. Near the end of the hour, Evan cornered me by the window that looks toward the river. You've heard her, he said. I hope that satisfies something in you. That assumes I needed something from tonight, I said. You needed control. This display owning the space parading staff, I walked into a room I maintain. He laughed again, but the laugh sounded like it had chipped a tooth. Your quaint stoicism plays well to a certain crowd. Unfortunately for you, the crowd that matters is mine, and mine doesn't forgive sabotage. Fortunately for me, I said I count differently. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to coax agreement the way a pickpocket coaxes a pocket to gape. Update your will, Helen. Give Lila the structure she deserves. Your reputation will survive on elegance, hers requires generosity. I looked at the hand he had placed on the sill. The knuckles were fine-boned. Take your hand off my window, I said very softly. He obeyed before realizing he had. We stood like that for a beat, the river, the hum of the quartet, the room's surface tension holding. Then he offered a smile as consolation to himself and went to find his associates. Word travels a ballroom like heat under a door. By the time dessert plates were stacked, phones on silent buzzed in pockets and clutched hands. An influencer Lila admired posted a story in earnest vowels when the venue was full of surprises over a slow pan of the chandeliers. Someone else turned the quiet before the reveal into a meme. 4 seconds of the empty floor captioned minimalism but make it money. The comments multiplied. The room tried to ignore its phone. We finished on time. Coats reappeared. Thank yous grew long. Arrangements for after parties formed burrs at the edge of conversation. Lila stood near the staircase looking like a portrait that has been varnished too heavily. When she hugged me, she missed my shoulder by an inch. I can't breathe, she said into the angle her stylist had left her. Then sit, I said. I can't sit. People are watching. People will keep. She let go of me, then touched my sleeve, a gesture that felt borrowed from a gentler calendar. Why the key, she asked, almost practical. Because it opens and it locks. And I wanted the room to remember there are 2 motions to every door. Outside, the night had the polite cold of moneyed neighborhoods. Cars idled under the awning. Camera flashes pinged like distant kitchen timers. Ella found my hand for a second, no more, then released it. Arjun bowed the width of that breath again. The staff slipped into the back of house corridors where work sets itself down without applause. At home, the lamp hummed as if it had been waiting at its note. I set the key on the linen notebook and smoothed the dish towel beside them both. The house had that after-event quiet, a delicate ringing where sound has been. I hung my sweater, put the pearls in their box, and washed my hands until the water turned from warm to not. The mirror over the sink offered my face back without commentary. I prefer it that way. The messages began. A cousin with a cheerful tone that cut. A colleague of Evan's I had met once, his text composed like a press release. A woman I had hired years ago for a project telling me it was a power move, as if I had been playing chess at the center of a table, when in fact I had been the table. I placed the phone face down and let it murmur into wood. Near midnight, the doorbell rang twice, the first ring decisive, the second thinner. When I opened the door, Lila stood there without her coat makeup, set strangely on skin that had moved. She entered as she always did, without waiting, and sank into the chair by the window. "You humiliated me," she said. The words were plain without garnish. I set the kettle on the stove and lit the blue ring. "Tea." She laughed and then it made a sound that was not laughter. Everyone saw. "They'll think—" She stopped. "They already think." I measured leaves into the pot. The scent was steady and green. Lila wiped at her face with a napkin she had taken from the console table without seeing it. For a long minute there was only water muttering its way to readiness. "You could have told me," she said softer. "You could have told me and I wouldn't." Another stop. She lifted her head. "Why didn't you?" I handed her a cup, took my own. "Because you didn't ask me how I was when you wanted what I have." She held the cup without drinking. Steam fogged a small crescent on her cheekbone. "Is that all I am to you now?" she said. "Someone who wants." "You're my daughter," I said. "You were my daughter when your shoes squeaked in the grocery aisle. You were my daughter when you called me staff. That hasn't changed." I placed my cup on the saucer so it wouldn't chip. "But what I answer to has." She looked toward the window where the streetlight made a thin silver bar across the floor. "Evan says this is salvageable if we spin it correctly," she said almost to the glass. "He says we can craft a narrative that—" She stopped again, hearing the sentence as it built itself. "Can you fix it?" "No," I said. Her shoulders went up as if I'd opened a door in a cold room. We sat with the kettle's last warmth traveling the air. When she finally stood, her hands shook, but not from the temperature. She walked to the door and stopped with her back half turned. "What do you want from me?" she asked. The effort it cost her to form the question showed down the line of her neck. "At this hour," I said, "for you to sleep without rewriting tonight." She nodded once, a movement so small it could have been a flinch, then let herself out. In the morning, the storm that had formed in pockets above tuxedo jackets and silk sleeves rolled across screens with cheerful industry. Clips of the empty room slowed and set to sly music. A still of the key on the side table annotated with a crown someone had drawn in digital gold. Evan's name trended beside a rumor about a client dispute. By noon, a pair of his partners issued statements heavy with air. The Aurelia's official account posted 3 photographs from later in the evening, tables lit, glasses shining as if to remind the city that a room can hold complexity. I brewed coffee and answered no calls. I scrubbed the roast pan from Thursday until the last brown gave itself up, then dried it with the good towel and laid the towel on the back of a chair to keep its shape. In the drawer, the key waited. I lifted it and then set it back down. Not everything needed my hand. When the door sounded again, the knock was softer than midnight's. Lila stood in the same place, hair gathered in a haste that left sincerity where polish used to be. She didn't cross the threshold. She held a paper in both hands, the way you hold a map you have decided to trust. "I don't know how to be inside what last night was," she said, "but I know how to arrive and say a thing without dressing it. I was wrong." I stepped aside so she could enter. The house recognized her and kept its opinion. She sat, the paper still in her hands. I poured coffee and set a cup where she could reach it. We stayed there while the day found its steadier light. The phone vibrated itself sideways under a magazine. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a truck reversed and clicked its warning like a metronome. Lila breathed, then breathed again, as if remembering how. Her eyes were rimmed red from effort, not cosmetics. I'll figure it out," she said, not to impress me, not to argue, only to put syllables to what her body had already begun. I didn't answer her with a plan. I passed her the napkin with the silvered edge. She held it the way you hold something that has traveled farther than you have. The brass key on the desk caught a line of sun, the small, honest gleam that metal makes when it simply tells the truth about light. The room kept it, and so did we. By morning, the city had learned to pronounce what last night had made plain. Headlines arranged themselves into neat paragraphs. Consultant Evan Vale faces scrutiny. Overinflated case studies. Partners seek review. Clients. Pause engagements. The tone wasn't outrage so much as distance, polite, like stepping around a spill in a crowded room. Clips of the empty ballroom kept traveling, trimmed to the 4 seconds before light rose. Someone slowed the sound of the key meeting wood until it became a note. I boiled coffee and let the pot sit until the kitchen found its pace. The brass key lay on the linen notebook, the dish towel folded beside them. Lila's cup from last night left a faint ring I didn't wipe immediately. The mark looked like punctuation that had thought better of itself. The door knocked once, no pretense, no flourish. Lila stood with her hair pulled back and the jacket she actually wears when she isn't being watched. She held a single page with the top folded down. "I made an appointment," she said, and passed me the paper. Riverstone Counseling Intake, Tuesday 10:00. Her name was written in the brisk hand of a receptionist who has learned most stories begin the same way. "Do you want coffee?" I asked. "Yes." She sat at the table as if it were something earned, not granted. When I set the cup down, she wrapped both hands around it, absorbing heat in small increments. "I can't undo last night," she said low. "I can decide to stop being the person who needed it." I nodded. The house listened without leaning in. When silence thickened, she didn't push it aside with new plans or old charms. She just breathed until the air thinned to ordinary again. By late afternoon, Miriam Cho came by with a paper bag that clinked. "It's just soup," she said, reading my face, "and a bottle that claims to be from a river-adjacent valley." Her hair, steel gray disciplined, made a clean line when she sat. She glanced at the key, then at me. "I assume you don't need advice about how not to explain yourself." "I am fresh out of explanations," I said. "Good." She set an envelope on the table. "Administrative items. Nothing dramatic. You're current everywhere that matters. If anyone asks for a comment, decline with kindness and accuracy." She poured 2 inches of the river adjacent. "Is Lila breathing?" "She's here," I said. "She booked the intake." The word intake felt practical enough to carry. Miriam lifted her glass the height of a breath. "To oxygen," she said, and set it down without drinking. She stayed an hour telling a small story about a clerk who labeled a file WALRD and apologized to the misspelling, not to the client. When she left, she squeezed my forearm. "Keep your lines clear," she said. That evening I cooked without a recipe. Onions surrendered to butter, garlic went pale, then fragrant, a chicken gave up its patience and browned. Around 7, Lila texted, coming without embroidery. She arrived with a casserole pan that was too hot for her grip. When she set it down, the oven mitt slipped, and we nearly lost the whole attempt to gravity. We laughed real unposed, the sound landing where it belonged. We ate at the small table, knees discovering each other's corners. I carved, she practiced passing things without directing the room. Halfway through, she looked at me directly. "I don't expect you to wipe the slate," she said. "I do expect you to tell me when I behave like someone I wouldn't sit with." "That can be arranged," I said. She exhaled and reached for the bread. The crust shattered louder than it needed to. We let the noise be noise. When dishes stacked, she stood to rinse them without commentary. The pattern was unfamiliar enough to require concentration. Water ran. The window over the sink fogged its small oval. "I told Evan I'm out," she said, not turning. He called it a panic move. I told him it was an accurate one. Did he listen? He recorded it as data. She turned off the tap and faced me, hands dripping. "I'm done being a data point in a story that keeps rewriting me." I handed her the towel with the silvered edge. She dried each finger as if counting. News about Evan kept unfolding, not with explosions, but with neat bulletins. A client's statement, a partner's interview, a letter from a firm whose tone approximated regret. I didn't keep score. I walked the long block after breakfast and bought tulips in a color that refuses to be named by a single word. At home, I trimmed their stems and slid them into a glass, so thin you could hear it think. On Tuesday, I waited in the cafe across from Riverstone with a book I didn't open. Lila went in alone. I drank coffee as if that were the point and watched a tree consider leaves it hadn't decided on. When she came out, her face had the rawness of air on skin that has stopped being performed. She didn't report. She asked for a banana. We walked to a cart and bought 2 from a man who cares about ripeness for a living. That night, I took down the cedar box from the top shelf of the wardrobe. Inside lay Andrew's ring and a letter he wrote during the winter we thought the car would not make a 3rd February. The paper smelled faintly of pencil shavings and time. If the day comes when they forget you built it, he'd written, "Don't trust amnesia with the keys." I rested the ring on my palm until warmth answered metal, then slid it back into the box and closed the lid. The sound it made was final in the way drawers admit they have reached their end. Lila kept showing up, not with grand gestures, just with days. She sent pictures of grocery lists that included things you can cook on a stove you've turned on yourself. She learned the names of cashiers she had stood in front of for years without hearing. She texted once from the bus squeaky shoes again. I remembered the cereal. I read it twice and didn't try to adjust the past so it would fit. One evening, I invited Miriam to dinner. Lila came with a dish that had tried for gratin and arrived as potato honest and uneven. We ate, the three of us, the way people do when the table is doing its work, forks finding plates, sentences finding their ends. Miriam asked Lila about nothing of consequence, which is how you open a door without requiring anyone to walk through it. After Lila collected the plates and returned with a dishcloth, she wiped the table in slow circles like polishing a thought until it shows what it is. When the door closed behind Miriam, we stood a moment in the hallway. "I don't know where to put everything," Lila said. "The old pieces don't fit." "Then we keep the ones that hold weight," I said, and set the others down. She nodded. The movement looked practiced and new. Spring pressed itself against the edges of the days. The community garden decided on fennel again. I walked to the hardware store and watched a boy ask for a key cut. The machine sang its bright shaving song, curls of metal dropping like punctuation the sentence had grown out of. On my way home, I stopped at Wren & Hale for lemon candies. The jar made its soft clack when the lid met glass. At the house light lay across the hallway runner with the confidence of an old habit. I set the candies beside the linen notebook, then opened to a page I had not written on. The key went on top, simple as a paperweight. My phone buzzed once. A message from Lila, session 3, told the truth about the staircase, practiced speaking without performance. I typed back, "Good. Eat something and put the phone face down." That night, Lila came over with no announcement. We made omelets that stuck slightly and didn't pretend otherwise. After, we sat by the window with peppermint tea. The steam fogged a small crescent on the glass. She watched it fade. "Respect," she said quietly, the word almost testing itself, "isn't yours to hand me like an extra fork." "No," I said, "it's yours to hold or drop." She nodded once and didn't look away. We let the quiet extend until it wasn't a test of endurance. It was just room. Later, when the house had returned itself to ordinary, I turned off the lamp and the window became the kind of mirror that doesn't ask for anything. On the table, the brass key caught a thread of streetlight and held it without decorating it. The silver-edged napkin lay folded, seam straight as a line. You choose each time you cross it. The kettle settled. The clock did what clocks do when they aren't being watched, kept time for rooms that are being used. I left the key where it was and went to bed. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.